Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. I think we'll get started. Maybe some people will join us in a little bit. So welcome to the last day of this conference. We've made it. My name is Alejandra Vargas, and I'm a Senior Program Officer with Canada's International Development Research Centre. And it is my pleasure to facilitate today's discussion on changing social norms. For those of you that are less familiar with IDRC, that I haven't had the pleasure of speaking to, our mandate is really to support the generation of research in low-income countries, primarily by low-income country researchers, especially young women, on critical development issues surrounding women's empowerment. Anything from care economy to obviously different forms of violence, including early child and forced marriage. So this presentation really kind of helps sum up a bit of the discussions that we've had over the past 3 days. And the messages that have come up for me time and time again is the recognition that there are no magic bullets, that single sector interventions, education alone, economic incentives alone don't quite cut it. Because time and time again we run into a discussion on the role of entrenched social norms and how that interplays to encourage early child and forced marriage. Whether that manifests itself in the forms of toxic masculinities or very restrictive views around taboos on sexualities. So really, this panel hopes to bring together people who have worked on this issue, both from an advocacy and a research perspective, to try to share some of the lessons learned around social norms as drivers of early child and forced marriage, but also hopefully to share some of the lessons and moments and glimpses of hope of moving the needle ever so slightly on promising interventions, both on advocacy and on research. And this is interesting because I think we can all agree that most donor initiatives tend to focus on interventions that are 2, 3, or 5 years. And changing social norms is a process that takes a long time. I think this is also an opportunity to have a conversation not just with our panelists, but really with everyone here in the room to learn about the work that you're doing and to find spaces hopefully for collaboration between researchers and advocates here and come up with a really clear agenda on where we go next after these 3 intense days of discussion. So a few things on housekeeping. So this session is being live streamed, so we might get some questions from people that are not in the room. And what we're going to do is we're going to pose a few short questions to our panelists. We have a little bit of a talk show. And then what we'll do is we'll open up the floor because we want to hear from you. We want to hear about the work that you're doing and some questions and comments. So with that, I'll start by introducing our panelists. So we have Rachel Marcus, who's a Senior Research Fellow for the Overseas Development Institute. You want to raise your hand, Rachel? Perfect. We have Raya Azmi, who's a Senior Research Associate for the James P. Grants School of Public Health, GRAC. We have Giovanna Lauro, who's the Vice President of Programs and Research at Promundo. And last but not least, we have Arati Sharma, who's a Program Coordinator for Oxfam Nepal.
Namaste.
So I think we'll get started, and maybe we can start with a little bit of a tantalizing question. And we'll start with Rachel. Talk to us a little bit about the state of knowledge on basically social norms as drivers of early child and forced marriage. Yeah, we can start with that. And maybe you can also comment on the interplay between social norms and a few of the other drivers that we're seeing.
Thank you. Is it in the last? Is this mic working?
No.
That's enough?
No.
Here, let's swap between. No? Yeah. So in the last 5 years or so, there's been an enormous flurry of interest in social norms and in gender norms. A lot of effort has gone into understanding what norms are and how they affect various different issues. Some of it coming from a focus very much on what people think within their mind and their perceptions of what others think they should do and how people should fit into society. A second set of strand of knowledge really coming from an analysis of culture and how that feeds into norms and how norms work in society, both to enable us to function but also to maintain practices that can be harmful to people. So if we skip to, just to get 2 slides. So Alejandro asked me to talk a bit about what we know about how norms interact with other factors, and particularly in relation to child marriage. I mean, I think we're all aware that there are a huge number of drivers, that there are social norms that encourage early marriage and child marriage and forced marriage, which, as I think we've all learned in the last few days, can have really different manifestations and drivers in different parts of the world, and sometimes it happens because they're forced into marriage. Sometimes it happens because young adolescents find themselves pregnant and then are compelled to get married, and sometimes because it's a freely chosen union of young people. And the drivers and the norms around those are going to be different in all of those cases. But in addition to all the norms, there are so many other factors which link into the norms and play out in different ways. And these are probably only just some of them, but these are some that we found through our research have been particularly useful. And I'm referring particularly to a program that ODI was involved in the last 5 years or so, working with researchers in Uganda, Ethiopia, Vietnam, and Nepal, that looked in detail at drivers of change around early marriage and child marriage and education in those 4 countries. But focusing in a bit on the norms, and these are some of the ones that came up in that research. So some of them are very much around sort of compulsions within, ideas within society about what women need to be, what makes a good life for a woman, and why it's so important to get married young. Others are around challenges and danger in the society, that marriage is a protection, that it enables you to be less at risk from violence. It keeps your own honour, it keeps the honour of your family, and that might have impacts on your siblings too. So if you don't get married, then potentially your sister can't or your brother can't, because your family seems a bit odd. So those sort of norms we know also really hold practice in place. And finally also issues around being obedient to your elders, which came out in our colleagues' research in a really strong way, that even if a young person didn't necessarily want to get married, it was also, they felt so compelled to do what their parents wanted them to do, what their grandparents sometimes were the ones who were pushing them to do. There was this really strong sense that they kind of needed to do what was expected of them, even if it wasn't what they really wanted. So I think those are some of the key things that we found in this work.
So maybe, Arati, you can ground some of this kind of conversation that Rachel just presented and some of the drivers through the lens of Oxfam's work in Nepal.
Hello everyone, I'm Arati Sarma from Nepal, working for Oxfam in Nepal. We have a project called Creating Spaces to Take Action on Violence Against Women and Girls in Nepal, being implemented through Oxfam in Nepal. So I will share some of my experience based on the work I have done in Nepal. For the first question that Alex raised is the state of knowledge of people. I would like to bring the understanding of people back from the community from Nepal. There are a few drivers who set people's mindset in our context. Some of them are, one of them is religious belief. People believe religious mythology very much in Nepal. Previously, even 20, 30 years before, they believed that marrying off their children in the early age will get their past to go to heaven directly. They believe so. That's why they married off their girls in early age. Even now, the situation has been different, but not so much. It's still there. So the other thing is cultural belief, especially in flatland area, in Tarai region. The dowry is very much a kind of big problem, which is promoting child marriage. Because whenever your girl is highly educated, parents have hard time to find highly educated boy for her, and they have to pay for his study, for his education. That's why it's better for parents to marry off their girls in the early age, even without proper education. So it's very dangerous issue, burning issue in the context of Tarai region. But in hilly region, in mountainous region, it's different. Mostly girls and boys, they marry by choice in hilly and mountainous region, but in Tarai, they are forced to get married due to the case of dowry. And the other thing is, the other social driver for accepting child marriage is the level of social acceptance for child marriage. Child marriage is not a big deal, big case in case of the rural context of Nepal, because they don't know about the ups and downs and negative consequences the girl or the boy face after the marriage. But nobody gives, nobody pays attention if the boys or the kid have different circumstances after marriage. But it's a very regular thing, you know. They do it just as the ritual. It's socially very much accepted. So the other thing is, there are legal procedures and policies in place in Nepal, but the problem is people don't know about that. We don't have that sort of advocacy campaigning and information disseminating system in place, so that people don't know about the legal procedure. They don't know that child marriage is punishable legal offense. They think like it's their family issue, their household issue, but they don't know the legal perspective on child marriage. The other thing is, the most difficult part is the gender discrimination as social norms, biggest social norms, because the boy and the girl get married, but the life changes so much for girls and not so much for boy, because Nepali society is basically a son-biased society. They give so much preference to son rather than daughter or daughter-in-law. So after getting married, the boy goes to school, he continues his study, but the girl is not allowed to go to school and continue her study. She is supposed to be at home, work as a woman, and she's supposed to give birth as soon as possible after the marriage. This is the thing why there is so much difference in the lives of girl and a boy. Yeah.
Thank you, Rathi. Raya, maybe you can share a little bit for people that are not familiar with your work for urban settlements in Bangladesh. Tell them what your work is about, and then kind of tell us a little bit about the drivers and the child and forced marriage in that context. Thank you. So our project is preventing early marriage in poor urban settlements of Bangladesh. It's a 3-year-long project funded by IDRC, and we did an exploratory qualitative study followed by a quantitative survey. And we did it in 2 of the largest slums in Bangladesh, one in Dhaka, Bhashantek, and another one called Shantinagar in Chittagong. So in that study, we did interviews of adolescent girls and boys, young men and women. We also talked to their parents, the teachers, the community leaders, and the program staff, which are working on early marriage issues and adolescent issues in the slum areas. So for us, social norms were pretty straightforward. These are the rules of behaviors that motivate you to actually conform to the expectations of the people you live amongst, namely your community. On a larger scale, it's the society you live in. So you act in a way you believe that these people act, or these people think it's appropriate to act. And why do you act in that way? Because if you do so, there are rewards. You maintain your position in the society, you are accepted, you are respected. If you go against these rules, or if you refuse to conform, what happens? Your position in the society may be compromised, you may be stigmatized, or you may face social exclusion. So definitely people want to conform because they are social beings. For us, gender norms were the rules of behaviors that sort of dictated how the people of different genders, here male and female, ought to act. So let me give you a brief context of urban slums because you may not be familiar with it. So 7 million people in our country, they live in urban slums. And these are illegal settlements. These are built on government lands, and it has a really high density of population. and people are migrating in and out all the time. The living conditions are really poor, the people, they have really low skills, and the unemployment rates are really high. And there are constant threats of eviction. But these spaces, they are evolving. They are in transition because of rapid urbanization and modernization. So you see these people have greater access to modern technology now. There's abundant use of mobile phones, smartphones, internet, even Facebook. And there are also more nuclear families now, many broken families with single mothers even. And the women, they have greater work opportunities in urban areas, and that's why we see more and more female decision makers in the family. But the adolescents, they are left unsupervised most of the times because both of their parents, they are compelled to work long hours. So what happens is that there is a greater chance of interaction between boys and girls within these spaces. And also, you will see an emergence of like use of drug, you will see love relationships among adolescent boys, you will see emergence of premarital sex because they are unsupervised. Also, there is an emergence of cyber crimes in these spaces because of this unguided use of modern technology, and also gang violence. That's also a characteristic of urban slums. So the question for us was that in this evolving context, what were the reasons of early marriage and how did the social norms or gender norms manifested themselves in the decision-making pathway? And these were the findings that we came up with. First of all, in these communities, there was no concept of adolescence as a transition period between childhood and adulthood. So when a girl hit menarche, she is ready for pregnancy, which means she is ready for sex, which means she is ready for marriage. She is an adult. So this concept in the decision-making process, that is actually a propagator of early marriage because they are no longer child, they are no longer considered child. Poverty was a reason, but poverty was a mediator in the pathway. It caused early marriage by causing dropping out of school of girls. And why did girls drop out more? Because to the parents, the girls are not going to go and earn. Their aim is to get married and to bear children. That's why when it came to a choice between the son and the son would be in school and the daughter would be forced to leave school. And also for families, because they want to reduce the economic burden, they would actually force the girl to drop out of school because of poverty. We also saw parents readily accepting good proposals, no matter how young the girl is. And good proposals are proposals that came from well-to-do families or families that lived outside of the slum. Because they want to secure a better future for their daughter, and because they think that the daughter's ultimate aim is to get married, it doesn't matter how young the girl is or if she wants to get married or not, the parents would force them to get married at a younger age. We saw many broken families, girls from divorced families, orphans, and also girls, they had single mothers. And for these girls, having a male guardianship or getting married is a way of gaining economic stability and social position inside the slum. So they would actually choose to get married early themselves. We also saw that because the usual age of marriage inside the slum community is 15 to 16, the older the girl gets, the higher the dowry rates. That is why poorer families, because they cannot bear that burden, they would actually choose to marry their daughters up early, so the dowry cost would be less. Like I mentioned during describing the context of urban slums, there's a lot of crime and violence. There are organized crimes, there are structural crimes, there's like a lot of sexual harassment going on. So the parents, they fear that the girl would be a victim of such violence and sexual harassment, and that would mean that the girl would lose her chastity and the family honor and reputation would be tarnished. To prevent that, they think that if she is married off and she is under a husband's guardianship, that would protect her from such violence and harassments. So they would actually, as you can see, 32% of cases we found in our study that the parents actually chose to marry off their daughters early to impart protection. Another interesting finding that we came up with is that adolescents themselves, they actually chose to get married early because they were in love relationships. And they also sort of coerced the parents
with threats of elopement or elopement itself. Because they knew that if they elope, then the family, their family would be under pressure. They would lose face in the society. It's very dishonorable. So if they threaten that, or if they elope with their boyfriend, then the parents would have no other way than to marry them off. So that is a form of coercion that was exerted by the adolescents themselves. Another form was that the parents, because this was so abundant in the slums, these sort of incidences, they thought if they married their daughter off as soon as they hit puberty, then they would not get a chance to get into a relationship with a boy or have premarital sex or elope. So the family honor would be preserved. That is why the parents would choose to marry them off early. Social norms also manifested themselves in the decision-making process in another way, which is that there were still girls who were delaying their marriage because they were in schools or they chose to work. But what happened is that there was a social backlash. So these served as examples to those who wanted to delay the marriage. For example, the girls who delayed their marriage, they were stigmatized. They were given names. Bura mein, old girls. Api atta, girls will never get married. Mere dosh ache, they said to them, means there is something wrong with the girl. Something wrong with the girl, so she's not being able to get married. They also had difficulty in finding good proposals. The matchmakers would not bring good proposals to them. They would bring divorces, or it would be a second marriage or a third marriage, or really old men. They wouldn't get good proposals because the viable age of marriage, which was 15 to 16, they have already crossed that. And the dowry cost for them would be much, much higher. And they may not have good proposals from good families even. So when these sort of examples are set by the society, the social backlash, then the parents are wary of their daughter's future. And so, you see, they would actually want to marry their daughters off early. When it came to this demand of higher dowry or this stigmatization, we found no difference based on socioeconomic class. Whether you're from a rich family or poor family or an influential family, it didn't matter. If you are an older girl and you have delayed your marriage, you will be stigmatized, so will be your family. Also, in case of working adolescents who chose to work, there were another types of levels. For example, girls who work and delay their marriage, they were deemed too independent or to have loose character. They were actually called loose girls because they spent longer hours outside working when they were supposed to marry and take care of the husband and bear children. And because girls are supposed to be dependent and submissive, you are working and earning for yourself, and you are bravely choosing to delay your marriage means you are too independent, and so you are not a good wife. So they would actually have real difficulty in getting good proposals. If I could just read out this case for you. This is an actual case, but we are using pseudonyms. Rokia, age 24, has been unmarried for a long time despite many proposals reaching her doorstep as she was pretty. Sometimes the boy didn't match her expectations, or sometimes she didn't match the boys. Few prospects chose other girls who were younger than her to marry over time, and she eventually contracted the name Abyaita, which means she will never be married, and her neighbors frequently call her that. There was even a rumor that she may be possessed by jinn or an evil spirit, and therefore she is not getting married and will never be able to get married.
Thank you, Raya. You probably couldn't see, but there were a lot of heads nodding around some of the examples that you were sharing, which kind of points to some of the same findings in different contexts, which is useful. So, Giovanna, you have the tall order, not to oversimplify, but our hope is lying on you to maybe share some of the promising kind of examples. So we've talked a lot about the problems that we're seeing, and I think some of these examples have come across in the last few days. Maybe you can give us a bit of glimpse of hope of some promising spaces where we can see some interventions that seem to be making a small dent on the issue that could be scaled up or could be discussed here for replication by others.
Sure. Thank you, Alejandra. And thank you to Girls of Rights for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to actually stand up for this so I can see the faces in the back. And maybe you can go on the next slide. Before I jump into this, obviously, because I work for Promundo, we're an organization that works to transform masculinities. A lot of what I'm going to focus on today is exactly around the norms related to masculinities, which is complementary to what obviously the other panelists have been discussing. And specifically, maybe I would like to highlight just a couple of general beliefs related to masculine norms that are kind of valid across many contexts. I'm not going to provide specific country examples, but just to reflect that just as we heard in Rachel's presentation around, for instance, the norms related to motherhood and being a caregiver for girls, obviously one of the key beliefs that underpin a lot of different norms related to a notion of masculinity is the one that identifies men primarily as providers, responsible financially for running the household and for making the key decision for providing for the household. Simultaneously, another key norm that I think many of us in many different settings keep on facing when we talk about masculinity relates, masculinity and child marriage specifically, relates to construction of sexuality. The norms according to which, for instance, men, and including young boys, are perceived as hypersexual, or definitely more sexual than girls, and more entitled to have a sexual life outside and within marriage, more entitled to pleasure, and as well as those norms that encourage boys and adult men to look for partners, female partners who are younger, easier to control, easier to submit to one's will. So I think these are kind of the general norms that we think about when we think about how to prevent child marriage by engaging men and boys. And here, this is a very clumsy table that I prepared. Actually, if you want to hear more details about this, I mean, I'm going to present it in a second, but I would strongly recommend that you look at a publication that Promundo worked on a few years ago with Margaret Green from Greenworks, that kind of reviewed the best practices that we knew at the time, it was I think 2014, on engaging men and boys to prevent child marriage. And there is a lot of focus also on the normative aspect of the work. And actually we're going to update it over the next few months, and we'll be launching a revised version hopefully later this year, so stay tuned. And for those of you also who would like maybe a more synthetic version of that, I know that Susan Petroni and with Girls Not Brides have also developed kind of a two-pager that kind of captures the essence, so that's also another resource that you may want to look at. But basically this table kind of tries to capture the various categories that we can work on and with when we think about engaging men and boys to prevent child marriage. And I'm going to review them in a second and then share maybe some common traits, common across all these categories. And just to be clear, I put here men specifically just to complement the conversation. But obviously when we talk about changing norms related to masculinities, it is essential also to work with women and girls. So a lot of these programs should be synchronized as possible from a gender perspective. So the first one obviously is working with fathers, essential to challenge norms that see men primarily as providers and not as caregivers. There is a good body of work going on from an implementation perspective. One that we have done, for instance, in India, in collaboration with World Vision in Agra, based on our program P, which is to engage fathers, but also other examples, for instance, from Save the Children. And again, this is really important because a lot of the evidence that you may be familiar with tells us how essential it is to work with fathers to promote more gender equitable examples for their own children, specifically how this contributes to raise more gender equitable boys, but also how this contributes to raise daughters who are much more self-confident and able to be in healthy relationships. The second category, obviously, very important to work with is grooms, especially future norms, adolescent boys. In adolescence, as you all know, is an essential entry point when we want to work on normative change, because really, especially young, very, very young adolescents, around 10 to 14, are an essential are at an essential stage in their lives where we can really work on changing the norms before they are ingrained, including norms related to sexuality. Here there are several examples from organizations also in the room, SCRW, CARE, Population Council, etc. I will not go into the details, and if you have specific questions about these projects, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to these organizations. I'm not an expert, but these are some very valuable examples. And then obviously there is the other category that we have heard about also over the course of this summit, in terms of working with male leaders, whether it's religious, traditional, community leader, tribal leaders, and other key stakeholders, whether it could be teachers, health workers, etc. So what do all of these all of these categories have in mind in terms of in common in terms of an approach to change, to promote normative change? Well, I think maybe there are two essential ingredients that I would like to highlight. First of all, they all strive to be gender transformative to different degrees, but that is, they all try not just to sensitize men about the dangers and consequences of child marriage, but really they try to question the gender norms, the unequal gender norms at the basis of the practice. And in order to do so, they need to question power dynamics. And that's a really important step that sometimes programs working with men shy away from. Actually, we're now working with UNFPA on their husband schools program in West Africa. I know that I've heard throughout the conference how sometimes people in West Africa were commenting on the lack of interventions in a setting where the prevalence is so high. And so the husband schools, for those of you who are not familiar with it, are an example of a promising intervention, which, however, until now it's just been gender sensitive in terms of working with men, adult men, married men, sensitizing them around issues related to child marriage and sexual reproductive health and rights, maternal and newborn child health. And now we're really trying to push the needle, trying to include a gender transformative perspective. And just plug in this now because all of our methodologies are open source, so when they will be available later this year, it will be also something that French-speaking colleagues will be able to access. The other element that many of these interventions have in common is kind of the structure. That is, they try to change norms at the same time as they try to change attitudes and behaviors. So very often you will see that there is a combination of group education targeting individuals in small group, encouraging a critical reflection around what it means to be a man, and trying to change inequitable masculinities, but also with a community mobilization component that really try to promote normative change in the broader community where this man lives. The last thing that I wanted to highlight is that obviously this is a part of the puzzle, but as we heard from Rachel, there are many other elements along with norms that we need to take into account when talking about child marriage prevention. And so specifically, I think something that I'm always very eager to highlight is the importance to remember to also tackle structural factors, policy changes, that affect the lives of women and girls and men and boys, and in this case, for instance, policies related to encouraging men to take a more proactive role in caregiving are really important to favor this kind of change. Because again, evidence tells us that sometimes norm can change first and behaviors will change afterwards, but sometimes behaviors change first and norm will follow. So I think that's something that we need to remember as we think critically about this work.
Thank you, Joanna. Arati, maybe from kind of an advocacy perspective, kind of drawing on the work from Oxfam and Nepal, can you tell us a little bit about what seems to be driving changes for the best, but for the better, in terms of social norms and technical examples?
Yes, it's again from the part of my experience under Creating Spaces project. There are several drivers which can change the social norms that we are struggling with. in my opinion, the first thing to do to change the social norms in terms of child marriage, child early and forced marriage is awareness raising. As I said earlier, there are policies, there are laws in place, but people are not aware of that. In that situation, the first thing we can do is raising the awareness of the people, like people who are directly involved in the child marriage cases. Those are like children's. They are mostly involved and affected by child force and early marriage. So we can change their thinking pattern, their thinking process by awareness raising. Likewise, we can also work with community people, because the situation of child marriage is very different from the urban area to the rural area, because in urban area, they are in the excess of information technology, they have television, they have mobile phones and everything. But in rural context, the situation is different. Even they don't have electricity in their houses. So the law and the legal context and policy status, they are so far from that. That's why awareness raising could be the best method to change the social norms. The other thing I would like to add is it's very important to work with stakeholders. They could be the social actors, they could be government officials, they could be like-minded organizations, they could be media and many other. Likewise, they could be the other influential champions of the community. In our Creating Spaces project too, we have practiced all sort of these things. Like Nepal has gone through change process in government structure recently, so we have new faces in place right now. So we are trying our best to bring them on board to work collectively against child marriage and any other social norms related to child marriage in Nepal. The other thing I would like to add is, as I said earlier, it's very difficult for girls to go back to school after once she gets married. So, so many children, especially girls, they are out of school right now. Government of Nepal is deliberately conducting school enrollment programs every year to address the issue. So that could be another thing we can do to change the social norms. That if the girl is educated once, though she is married off earlier, she can be the decision maker of her life. So this can be the fruitful idea for for changing social norms. The other thing I would like to add is, it's very much overrated terms, but I still would like to add, like, transformative leadership could be the best way to change the social norms, because it is believed that girls need to look after her house, look after her in-laws and her children. She is not supposed to go out and be active socially. But we, under Creating Spaces project, want to change the mindset, want to change the stereotypical thought process. So we have a community discussion center, and where women regularly come there for 2 hours a day. They discuss their issues, and mostly issues related to child marriage, violence against women and girls, and transformative leadership. And this method is called Reflect methodology. Many of you must have heard about this. This is founded by Paulo Freire, and this has been adopted by more than 70 countries in the world. This is very much proven methodology for community development and transformative change, social mobilization, and also we are applying that in our program. Actually, Oxfam believes that the best model for working in community is Reflect methodology. Likewise, we have other methodology called interactive forum theater. This was also founded by one of the disciples of Paulo Freire, he was Augusto Boal, and it is also the very known and proven methodology for social mobilization. It is called Theatre of the Oppressed, that is interactive forum theatre. So we are also applying that in our program, which has been very much successful in bringing about social change regarding CEFM, child force and early marriage, and other social norms. And likewise, I said about the method of reflect and interactive forum theatre, these are the method which is very much people-centric, because we go to their places, we talk to them, we try to convince them, and it's called CAP change, I guess. Knowledge, attitude, and first they will induce by knowledge, and then they will change their attitude, and then they will bring that in their practice. That way, we are working very much in behavior change communication. So this people-centric method could be the other example for fighting against social norms. And the last but not the least, advocacy is the most. I believe very much in advocacy, because we work in community, we work in district, and we fight for policy change. It's not possible. If we want to change our policy or reform our policy, then we must work with our stakeholders, our policymakers, lawmakers. That's why amplifying our voice time and again is the most essential thing for bringing about change, not only in practice but policy-wise too. So I believe in advocacy, even evidence-based advocacy. If there is no evidence of your work, then you can't convince the people who are in the position where they could make law. So, for example, Creating Spaces project has been successful for stopping a total of 58 cases of child marriage only in the year 2017-18 by now. So, I believe in evidence-based advocacy, because we are doing that, and it's tested okay. Thank you.
We'll open the discussion in a little bit, but people have kind of questions about the specifics of how this work has been done, or want to share some of your specific work on this. We'd love to hear some examples from the room. Rachel, do you want to give us some insights from OBI on this issue?
Sure. Gives me on the slide. So yes, we in our work around this area, we've looked at some of the factors that drive change in norms and practices around child marriage. We've heard some really inspiring examples of programs that have worked in many different ways to change norms and leading to change in practice. These are some of the broader factors, the more structural drivers of change that we found through our analysis of work. I think it's important to say that these structural drivers could work in either direction. Sometimes, on the whole, we've picked them out because there's evidence that they lead to positive change, but that isn't necessarily always the case. For example, we know that on the whole, staying in school for longer leads to delays in child marriage, but a schooling experience can be very different. Where a school is really gender sensitive and is making a strong effort to teach in ways that both boys and girls get equal opportunities to learn, to answer questions, to develop self-confidence, and so on, and a school where the curriculum addresses these issues and it allows young people to learn about their rights, is going to be very different than a school where maybe the teachers are demonstrating or inculcating more conservative attitudes, where they're giving the message that actually, girls don't really need to try that hard because they're going to get married, and that's their place in life, and where they're giving a lot more attention to the boys, for example. So I think with many of these, it's important that they're happening in a transformative way. We were just, some of us in a really interesting session about use of the media, and again, the example came up, the many wonderful dramas and radio spots and TV spots and so on that have been used to try to change norms around child marriage, but also and many commercial non-development sector soap operas and so on also can lead to change through the role modelling of different ways of living, of what life can be like if you marry later. But equally, there are many commercial media stories that reinforce much more gender stereotypical, gender discriminatory attitudes. And in those cases, those are probably not going to be drivers of change. They could even be drivers of negative change. So I think one of the key things I would like to say to is not to talk too much is for all of us who are engaged in advocacy, it's really important to be aware of these kinds of drivers, to engage with these kind of drivers, and to be aware that they could go both ways. As for example, with the mobile phones, our research in a couple of countries, Nepal and Vietnam, found that where young people had access to mobile phones, they were engaging in courtships by mobile phone with a young boy or a young girl, and often engaging to meet and elope after hardly having had any personal contact, but it had all been arranged by mobile phone.
Thank you. That's a super interesting example. I would love to hear a little bit more through the discussion. I have one, and maybe we can cover it in 1 minute just to hear a little bit from the room. But it's a little bit about kind of where we go next, and what are some of the knowledge gaps that should be addressed, what are some of the kind of advocacy gaps, and what's the role of collaboration in this to move the agenda forward. So maybe we can start with Raya, and you can tell us a little bit about where you think there's research gaps that should be addressed on this issue.
So I wouldn't really want you to think that the situation is very grim in the slums for all the girls who delayed marriage. What I would say is that there is still a silver lining. So more and more girls are actually choosing to go against all the social stigma and backlash, and they're choosing to work, and they're choosing to educate themselves. They're making a distinct choice between having a domestic dependent life and actually gaining independence and stability for themselves. But now what we need to do is to have like a follow-up research, because the question is, what is next for them? What happens in their future? So they're working, but they're making a choice, they're educating themselves, but what are the negatives and positives of such choices? What are the repercussions in their life? Are they, will they be able to sustain themselves and their families when they're working? What would happen when they would actually want to get married? What sort of proposals? What would be the dowry cost for them? Would they be successful examples for other adolescent girls, or would they again be tragedies for other adolescent girls? So there are follow-up researches required in that area. And also some of the other things would be definitely more researches on young men, how they perceive child marriage issues, their masculinity, their ideas of sexuality. These things need to be explored to actually design interventions and include men in the discussion. Risky behaviors, we have lack of evidence there, because slum context, there are a lot of risky behaviors going on, and with adolescents, that's always an issue. Mental and emotional health and well-being of adolescents, these are also areas that should be explored in the future. In terms of designing future interventions, what we understood from the community perspective and the beneficiaries is that the interventions and programs, they need a sound understanding of the context first before they actually start delivering the intervention. So they need to have like a bottom-up approach instead of a top-down approach, and this is where there can be like a really good collaboration between research and programs, understanding the context, the community, what would adolescents be attracted to if they want to be involved in those programs, understanding that first, and then sort of designing the programs, and also having a strong monitoring and evaluation component within the programs. So over time, we can actually have evidence on what is working and what is not working, because sometimes it's not very clear. Also, the interventions and programs, they should actually include male adolescents, because that's an area we find that male adolescents and men in general are often neglected in these programs and interventions in the discourse of child marriage. And that should not be focused on only raising awareness of child marriage, rather their sexuality, gender roles, decision-making, consent and choice, sexual and reproductive health and rights. Those should be the issues around which interventions should be designed for both male and female adolescents. And the programs need to be flexible. and they need to be able to adapt to the changing needs of adolescents, because the contexts are rapidly evolving for adolescents, whether it's a slum, it's an urban area or rural area. With technology and modernization, everything is changing for them, and they are growing up fast too. So the programs should be flexible and adaptive to those contextual changes and also the needs of adolescents.
Giovanna?
Sure. Can you put the slide? Thank you. Just a couple of slides to conclude this. So some common errors. I think something that when we work with engaging men and boys in child marriage prevention and in general in gender transformative work, that we see very often, especially now that there is so much attention, there is this explosion of attention, not only to work around norms, but also to work with men and boys with norms, is that actually not only very few programs still work directly with men and boys, it's still a limited number, and this is not to detract attention from the ones working with men and girls, but more to highlight the importance of complementarity, as my colleague here was saying, but also the fact that many of the programs are actually already working with men and boys, sometimes try to only work with group education. That is, they aim at changing individual attitudes and behaviors, but because of limited budgets, very often we see that the community mobilization component is the one that gets cut out. And this is just a reminder of how important that is, especially if we want to change norms and to change meaningful impact, just making sure to truly use this kind of holistic approach, also in order to minimize the harm that our programs may bring to the beneficiaries. Because again, those beneficiaries who go through group education, who change their attitudes, who change their behaviors, are still living in communities where the norms are not changing. And unless we also make an effort through community mobilization, we really risk to do harm. The second point that I wanted to highlight, there is a typo, an extra word in that bullet, but basically it's about the importance of tackling norms related to construction of sexuality, both masculine and feminine, and ideally going even beyond the binary. Just earlier this morning, we had an event with a working group composed by many of the organizations at this summit, trying to really push forward the agenda, thinking critically about what it takes to work on sexuality through gender transformative programming, aiming at preventing child marriage, early child and forced marriage. We just actually published at least the executive summary of a review that we have worked on. So for those of you who are interested in learning more, please come here, let me know. Otherwise, our colleague Nidal from CARE and others in the room may also be able to provide you with more information. But stay tuned, the full report will be available soon. And this is obviously a problem, the construction of sexuality, that it's not just typical of traditional societies, as sometimes we tend to frame them in the West, but it's very much something that we deal in literally every country except for a few, as you know, in Northern Europe. The third point, the need in terms of research. A lot of the work with men and boys in the prevention of child marriage has not been rigorously evaluated. There are some examples of good evaluations, but a lot more can be done. Especially something that it's particularly important for me is the work around religious leaders. Sometimes it's obviously it's very important when we think about changing norms, but sometimes it can become a buzzword, especially from some funders who are very eager to see us working with religious leaders. And I think it's really key to rigorously evaluate the intervention which are working on this and understand what is that works and share that more broadly with the field. Finally, in terms of common errors, I think there were a few sessions here at this summit, and it was great to see them around scaling up the work, being more intersectional, and encouraging sustainability. And ideally moving from an NGO-led implementation of this gender transformative work to prevent child marriage to a model where actually work is being implemented maybe by communities themselves, or by public systems, whether it's through health workers, through teachers, educators. And I think the question mark there, when we talk about gender transformative work, is two questions actually. How do we maintain quality, first of all? Because we know that gender transformative work works when the group settings are really well facilitated. And this is a very heavy investment at the very beginning of the intervention, and then it kind of pays off. But how do we control the quality of that investment where we are no longer in control of the intervention? So that's something very important, and I think more implementation research is needed as we try to scale up these interventions. The other element for me very critical to think about when we think about scaling up, especially again vertically, working with public institutions to scale up this kind of work, how do we maintain that kind of critical reflection aspect, the Paulo Freire kind of approach that questions systems of oppression? It's very political at its core. Because again, gender transformative approaches are political, and so when we try to scale them up, how do we maintain that component? That's a question mark. Not to go against scaling up, we have to and we should, but how do we do it in a way that maintains the political aspect? On the next slide, just to conclude in terms of where do we go next? So kind of summarizing, maybe repeating some of the themes that we've already discussed. Again, when we talk about changing norms, as I mentioned before, it's essential to start very early, as early as possible, talking about, again, child marriage prevention, but not just changing the norms related specifically to child marriage, but more deeply also the norms related to deeply ingrained notions of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman in a society, including norms related to sexuality. The silver bullet here is comprehensive sexuality education, a human rights based comprehensive sexuality education in and out of school, and ideally also for married girls. We know that that's often still ignored population. The second point is the importance of adopting an intergenerational approach. As we work with young people, both boys and girls, to prevent child marriage, we know also of the risk that we may put them through by empowering them and making them stronger advocates for their own rights and the rights of their sisters, if we don't work at the same time with gatekeepers in their lives, or whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, etc., etc. So really important, and something that I have not included here, but that my colleague just mentioned, is important also to address the mental health needs of young people. So the importance of providing psychosocial support, especially because we know that girls in a child marriage or at risk of a child marriage are facing very often, are experiencing very often situations of family violence, domestic violence. The last 2 points, just to conclude, again, the third one I've already mentioned it to some extent, the need to work more specifically on more research, and especially on normative measures. I think as a field of engaging men and boys, we've done a pretty good job at measuring changes in terms of attitudes and behaviors. Much more needs to be done in terms of changing norms, especially at the community level. What is the impact there, and how it is diffused? And finally, let's not forget to strengthen legislative and protection services, as well as addressing structural drivers of spousal age gap. We have heard a lot in this summit. We've talked a lot about age and consent and agency, and very often we are starting to qualify agency in those settings where it may seem that girls may be choosing to marry at an early age. And so what are the factors that contribute to this limited, to this constrained agency? So kind of navigating the line between acknowledging the sense of agency of girls and treating them as able to choose, and at the same time thinking very critically about what can be done beyond normative change, but from a structural perspective to widen the aspirations that they have available, to widen the meaningful opportunities that they have in their lives, and to do the same for boys, because we know that very often girls or their families may see younger boys as less attractive because they do not have access to meaningful jobs.
Veronica, do you have any brief to add to this discussion from the work of Alzheimer from an advocacy perspective? What to do better, what to do less of?
In my opinion, there could be several gaps in development programming. around child force and early marriage. One could be the program which don't have holistic approach. In our experience, in our country, the organizations which are working in education, they don't work much in child marriage, and which organization they work for child marriage, they don't have the component of bringing girls back to their schools. These kind of gaps could be seen in many kind of projects. Like in our project, Creating Spaces project, we have a massive component in bringing children together for their transformative leadership and other things, to making them community champions against child force and early marriage. But we don't work much in education and bringing them back to school. These sort of errors are creating problems, issues while ending child marriage, in my opinion. So the programs should be holistically sound to work on child marriage. I think so, because one-dimensional program could not solve the entire problem. And the other point I think is, we are doing projects. Even in Oxfam, we are doing projects. Behavior change takes longer. It's not a projected thing, but we do project, and we believe that our project brings all the changes that we are aspired to. But it's not real. It's not true. We need to do campaigns. In my opinion, campaigns are best solution for ending child marriage, child force, and early marriage. Projects are not enough. My other point is, media is very powerful. Media has a power of voice and of writing. So if media wants to do something to change social norms, then they could do it. And development media and development initiatives could go together to end child marriage. And it's not happening, so that is one of the errors. And the last one is, there should be testimonies of evidences. There should be research, there should be a study, and there should be evidences around us what can work best to end child marriage, to work in community, and to bringing policymakers on board. That sort of thing should be in place. For instance, Oxfam is conducting one formative research on social norms. So we're trying to cascade the thing, like I already shared, things of community discussion centers, child marriage, interactive forum theater, sort of thing, so that we could show or we could disseminate the things that what's gonna work best for ending child marriage. And if the research brings about all those things, then we're going to hand it over to government of Nepal for the replication and for the best use of it. Thank you.
You have the last word, Rachel, from a research perspective on kind of knowledge gaps, and maybe a little bit, you can talk a bit about Align and the kind of spaces for collaboration across sectors, which would be great to hear.
Thank you. I think rather than talk about knowledge gaps, I mean, one thing that I suggested is perhaps we need more nuance to really understand how norms play out differently around child marriage in different places, and more nuance around the drivers. You know, taking the example, this is an example of schooling and education, which, you know, the norms are really quite different for different groups. For example, around married girls staying in school, but when they're a little bit older, in some contexts, completely fine for them to go to college. But the idea of going back to school, finishing your secondary education, is almost taboo. So that's one example where we need more differentiation. Likewise, again, about why the norms that are encouraging young people to get into marriage in the first place. But as we don't have much time for questions, I'll move on quickly to just highlighting Align, which is a program that I'm involved in, and my colleague Rachel George at the back is the coordinator of the program. I've mentioned this in one of the sessions yesterday. So we are, as it says, a digital platform and community of practice for sharing knowledge and innovations on gender norms. We're funded by the Gates Foundation, and it's housed at ONI in London. We are very keen to be what we're supposed to be, a hub to encourage contributions and insights, which could be written, they could be audio, they could be video clips, they could be long, they could be short case studies of different work and different reflections on what's worked and what hasn't worked in actions to change gender norms. So please do get in touch with us about that. We have, could you move the slide on? So we have various different aspects, and I encourage you to have a look on the platform. A resource library, which is constantly growing, and we very much welcome for people to share work that you've been involved in to add to that. We are developing thematic guides on a number of issues, with one due on child marriage fairly soon. We recommend reading lists, for example, colleagues in Promundo have developed one of those, and lots of other materials coming. We also have a couple of funding streams. One is currently open, though about to close, to support people to convene meetings around gender norm change in around particular issues that are of importance to them. That closes tomorrow, so perhaps for most people it might be better to look out for the next window, which will probably be in a year's time. We also have a small research fund as well, and that window will probably open in January, February next year. Could you move on to the next slide? So, I mean, that's really just saying again that we will be having a set of webinars. Once the webinars start, then there will also be forums on the site where people could discuss issues around gender norms. And again, we very much want to be led by what is useful to the community of people who are out there working on gender norms, and not to it all be coming from us in one organisation. So please do get in touch and share your ideas of what you would like to see there, and please do be active in contributing.
So don't leave to apply for this. Stay with us for some kind of questions and comments. I know the deadline's tomorrow, but perfect. Okay, so we're going to take a round of questions.
Yeah, my name is Joshi. I'm from Breakthrough, and when I was listening to the religious leaders one, in India, what we start doing is to separate the religion and the culture separate, because a lot of cultural practices is easy to crack. So when the girls are born, they are not celebrated. There are no songs written. There is no practices. There is no cultural. So in the place we work in Haryana, there is a practice called Thali Bajao. Means you bring the plate when boys are born. For the girls, there is nothing. Sometimes we conflate the religion and culture together into one plate, but our experience is, the culture ones are easy to break, and we use theatre of the oppressed a lot, and that's how we use the cultural break. Another one which I thought, working with men and boys, the norms are held at different spaces. There's a personal space, there's a family space, there's a community public space, and an institutional space. And the norms are held at different levels. In the personal space, men are easy to, and even in family space, they sometimes behave very equitably. But the moment they step into public space and the institutional space, they behave very differently, because there is a community pressure which is built up inside. So I actually would like to know more about how do you deal with spaces, different spaces, and where to be actually grappling with this question for some time.
Thank you. Mohammed, you had a question?
Thank you very much. Nice to share different experience from different projects, especially from Brack James Bigant experience by Raya. I am share one question. Before that, I want to share my reflection and experience that we are implementing a project, a tipping point project, funded by Candida Fund USA. Our focusing is totally social norms, changing social norms related to child marriage. But major difference is Black James speakers are is working in urban slum area, but we are working in extremely rural Haur area, where 70 to 80% working area goes underwater, and it's run up to 6 months. So geographical context is very much different. And we have, from the beginning of the project, we have done a community participatory analysis, and we found that social norms is a key drivers of child marriage. Considering to change social norms, we are working to building agency among the girls, adolescent girls. We are promoting alternative opportunity, building social movement in the community. We think that many more NGOs and government initiative here to change social norms, but their initiative is different. They are, especially government, this is our challenge also, government want to stop child marriage anyhow by using administrative power, using law, but we think that this is not a sustainable approach. In case of stop child marriage by sustainable approach, we should have go to change social norms. This is our, at first, one of the government structure, Nari Nirjatan Pratirod Committee, that means prevention committee to against violence against women. We are working from the beginning with this structure, but we are far from this approach. They are trying to stop child marriage anyhow. When we talked about our project with the government person, they first want to know how many incidents we are able to stop. They think this is the achievement. But we think that if we want to use government administrative power policing, these incidents finally not stop. It happened something even midnight without challenging any celebration. So, social norms approach is the sustainable approach. Another challenge is alternative opportunity for girls. Yes, though remoteness, government and others NGO do not have any opportunities for adolescents in terms of remote areas. This is our also challenge. We have some evidence also. We have some innovation belief considering social norms. We have some innovative evaluation approach, photo, voice, sense makeup that are available in our website also. So my last question is, sorry, my last question is, do you have any sense to social norms approach in your working, especially for all? This is my expectation to know the any challenge faced to change social norms. Thank you.
So you have a chance to establish good behavior by asking a question.
Okay, quick question. I was just wondering your thoughts on or your experiences of the use of positive messaging in relation to marriage, to consenting adults, educated, ability to work, both mature, and as opposed to, or in addition to, the sensitisation of negative messages about the consequences of child marriage, and how that could be used in a gender transformative way.
Namaste, I'm Rajan from Nepal. My question is, so now in Nepal, while going to rural place to the mountainous area, so there is now the complaints and the new norms has been formed, like it's not us who want to get married, but the organization like you bringing boys and girls together and making aware on different things which they should not know. And now it's us, increasing child marriage rather than parents. So how we can deal such new norms that will arise due to our working communities.
Okay then, you're gonna speak really quickly because I know you can. Go for it.
I'll be very quick. I just want to say I think it's helpful to work both on, when we work on human rights and we use the language of human rights, in my experience with Tostan, I found it very helpful to work on human rights and responsibilities because the social norms approach is shared. It's not just the girls, it's not just the parents, but it's the parents' friends, it's the parents' cousins, it's the mother-in-law, So we need to work with everyone and raise the responsibility that they all hold in helping these girls thrive.
Thank you.
Yes, related in some sense to what Ben was just saying. In terms of changing social norms, of course, it's critical to decide who we're going to involve. There's all sorts of activities and approaches we can use, but who's going to be involved? And I think critical questions that we don't always ask, maybe. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to thank the participants. I was thinking of what Ben had said. I think a question in formative research or whatever that we don't always ask ourselves is, who is it who is culturally responsible for perpetuating those norms that we want to change? And secondly, who has the cultural authority to change those norms? Yes? And I think from my work in West Africa and from my knowledge and exchanges here with people in Asia and also some in Latin America, I think culturally speaking, it is not the young people who have the cultural responsibility or authority to change the norms. And so it's rather the elders. So taking a cultural perspective, given the important role of the elders, and related to what Giovanna mentioned, I think the importance of an intergenerational approach, which and an inclusive approach within communities. So I'd just like to mention quickly, and I will be sharing more on our intergenerational dialogue approach at 1 o'clock on the poster, to where, in order to bring about change within, very much a systems approach within community systems. Just one more sentence. In our work in Senegal, we're involving elders, both grandmothers, grandfathers, religious leaders, parents, and adolescents and teachers in intergenerational dialogue, and using a Palafarian kind of approach. And what I could say, you might be surprised, but it's really, in our case, it is the grandmothers who are leading the charge in terms of putting pressure on the men and supporting the girls. And there's a current research project going on with the Institute of Reproductive Health in Washington, working on documenting this. Thank you.
You raise your hand. And then we'll...
Let me go there so that I can see everybody. My name is Kiran, I'm from Nepal. I represent government, and all the deliberations were fantastic. Actually, a lot of lessons I have drawn. And I have also come to the conclusion that whatever government is doing in Nepal, in collaboration with the civil societies, INGOs, actually we are in the right path. We are in the right path, but much has yet to be done. That is my conclusion. And let me tell you that I am a product of child marriage. My mother never confessed that child marriage was the wrong thing. So this is how social norms and values are deeply rooted in the society. That's where we have to get, through education, through advocacy. Actually, all these things are coming here. Last year, I was in a district as a district magistrate in our adjoining district of Kathmandu, capital city, and child marriage was taking place. And I was looking at that. Still, I couldn't stop it because social pressure was too much there. Because the family had a strong belief that the boy was from very nice family, and the girl may not be getting husband like that gentleman. So this is the situation, and at the moment, government in collaboration with the civil societies are doing so many works. And one of them is distributing cycle to the kids, especially adolescent girls, so that they go to the school, they continue education. Until unless they continue education, there is less likelihood that they get married. And another is stipend, actually. Those girls who go to school, she is entitled to get at least 10 rupees per day. And that counts a lot for the family. So I'm finishing almost. And so actually, I was drawing from all this discussion, what is the implication for the government? What Nepal government should do in light of the national strategy to end child marriage that was enacted 2 years back. This is the area actually we have really need to ponder upon. And one thing I would like to highlight at the end is that we need to have an integrated approach, be it social norms and values issues, or be it empowering girls and mobilizing communities, men or boys. So there should be a holistic approach, as Adolescent highlighted. There should be a different component that should be aligned. And last but not the least, I would like to quote Mother Teresa, Alexandra. She says that you can do, I cannot do, I can do, you cannot do. Together we can do so many things. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
There's a youth advocate here who would like to say something.
So let's allow some of our panelists to tackle some of the questions, some more comments, and then I'll be super happy to go do that, I promise. Joanna, or there's a couple mics here, whoever wants to join in.
Sure, very quickly, maybe addressing a couple of the questions. The first one from our colleague at Breakthrough, in terms of the interaction between private and public spaces when we work with men, fully agree. I think, so the group education sessions that we have last several months, right? It's weekly meetings, and at the first meetings, you can see this division between what's private and public is so strong that it always strikes me where men who start changing, they start taking on small chores at home, domestic chores, but they may even be ashamed to just broom the floor outside, because in the backyard that the neighbors see them. But it's gradual, right? And so that's what matters, and that's why it's important to have long-term interventions. What the evidence is telling us is that at least 4 months, once a week for a couple of hours, in terms of minimum dose, because really, we really need to work hard in terms of overcoming the divide. And the approach that we use as Promondo, along with others, is promoting really positive deviance in communities, right? And so modeling that comes from the community itself, and that's why the community aspect, the community mobilization aspect, is essential to go hand in hand with the group education. Something that I think we need to do as a field and as an organization as well is getting better at measuring that. So we have done, as Promondo, I think maybe 4 CTs of our work over the past few years. They're all about the group education. So that's the next challenge in terms of looking at the community aspect and that kind of divide. Absolutely. So thank you for the question. The second question that I wanted to address is from the lady behind you about the use of positive messaging. Thank you so much. Something really important, and I think really key when we talk about sexuality. A lot of the sexuality of girls and of boys as well is framed always negatively in terms of teenage pregnancy prevention, as you know. And so definitely more positive language and focus on girls' pleasure is essential. The other element that I think is key when we talk about positive messaging is when we, especially when we talk about working with men and boys, is stressing really what's in it for them. A lot of the work sometimes risks to be instrumental for the benefits of women and girls, which obviously is important and is an essential component. But for the work to be truly transformative and sustainable, we find that really encouraging men to see what's in it for them, what's the advantage in their own lives in terms of promoting and living gender equality. It's key, and so positive messaging there it's essential. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for sharing your experience from your project, Tipping Point project here. So when we were conducting the research in the field, we actually found that although government had like a strict policy and wanted to enforce laws, people would come up with ingenious ways on how to challenge the authority and actually carry on with early marriages. So some of the examples that we found were that they would actually not inform the local members or the local authority of the marriage until just before the marriage ceremony started. So they would have no way to stop it. That was one. They would actually take the girl back to their villages and then get her married off there in secret. So nobody knew. So no one was there to stop it. Another weapon that they actually employed is forging the birth registration certificates. And because there's like a lot of corruption in the system, in the grassroots level, so the local authorities were supposed to issue the birth registration cards, they would do it for money. So if you bribe them, you get a false registration card that states your age as like 18 or above 18. So even when the Qazis of the local authority checked those, there was no stopping child marriage. Another thing was that they would actually use, they would actually ask Qazis they know, like family friends, or from the local mosque, to actually conduct the ceremony. So even if he recognized that the girl is underage, he wouldn't really say anything because he was friends with the family of the groom or family of the bride. And there was also bribing of the local Qazis, so they would actually stay hush.
so they were paid hush money not to stop the marriage. So there were many ways that they were finding to actually cut across and continue with the practice of early marriage despite the authorities. And so without changing the point that you said, I absolutely agree that without actually trying to change the mindset of the people and sort of influencing the gender norms and social norms, without actually showing them the negatives of child marriage and the positives of what would be if the girl is being married off early, without changing those mindsets, having like a really harsh policy or law enforcement, that is actually not going to work when we're working with like mass people and trying to change an issue like child marriage. Second question that I would like to address was about like positive messaging. I think that's an idea that we all think is very important, and when we actually did our research, we found that girls and also families who were in touch with other communities, and due to their like when they went to get an education or when they went to work in those spaces, when they came in touch with other communities where they could actually see other people and other girls like positive role models, teachers, or maybe colleagues, or maybe a classmate that is delaying marriage, and they have like a better condition in the society in terms of they're independent, they are earning, they are getting an education, and they're living better lives. That actually sort of influenced them to think what could be for them. So I think when we have been trying to give this message like child marriage is harmful for health, there are consequences of early pregnancy and all of that, but people's mindsets are not changing because they believe one thing and they believe what they believe. And they would say we have many other examples where nothing really happened, nothing negative happened. So my mother was early married, my grandmother gave birth when she was only 15, so nothing happened. So giving those negative messages, they don't really speak true to the people. But sometimes giving, but on the opposite, positive messages, they do. We need to show them like what could be the positives and what could be some of the alternatives that actually lead to a better life for their girls. Whether it be education opportunities, whether it be what employment opportunities, whether it be showing them what girls could actually achieve if they are given opportunities, and they could achieve the same things that a boy can achieve, and how their girl's life can change and how they can actually contribute to the family's change of family's condition if they are given those opportunities. They are equal to boys and they are no less than boys. So sort of enforcing that with the parents, I think that would work much better. We actually found that works much better when the parents think that way to delay the marriages of their daughters than giving negative messages. So positive messaging is very important and a key, I think, moving forward in designing interventions.
No, I won't add anything because really my points are being covered by others.
So, because I promised in the spirit of hearing youth, so there's two young people who have been very patient waiting, but you're going to pose your question really quickly. We'll cover both of them, and then maybe say who you want to answer from, just to make this efficient.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for your presentation. My name is Natalie. I'm from the Netherlands. I work for Choice for Youth and Sexuality, youth-led organization. And actually, my question is indeed about youth. I must say I don't agree with my neighbor saying that young people are not the ones that should be on the forefront of making changes in social norms. And I was wondering about you, because I haven't seen it coming back in your presentations a lot, the role of the young people. So where do you see them? I didn't have a specific person to hear it from, but maybe from you. Where do you see the role of the young people in the social norm change? Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. Last word.
I'm studying. I'm Bangla. I did my language Bangla. She translate. Okay. আমরা হচ্ছে যে আমি ইউথ ডেলিগেট, আমি আমার সোসাইটিতে কাজ করি। তো হচ্ছে আমি জানি যে আসলে এটা কি, তো হচ্ছে কি আমরা সবসময় কথা বলতে পারি না, যার জন্য কথা সবাই আমাদের কথা শুনে না, সবার সাথে কথা বলতে পারি না। তো কথা ছাড়া আমরা কিভাবে এটা বন্ধ করতে পারি?
So Megla is a youth delegate from Bangladesh, and she wanted to ask the question that as youth, they do see social norms as a big obstacle, but when they speak up, nobody listens to them. So her question is, if we want to change the norms as youth, is there some other way of doing it that doesn't involve them trying to talk to others and convince them because they're not being heard? So her question is, what are the other mediums in which they can be heard by adults, I guess?
That's an excellent question. All right. And then the final words from this group. Who wants to tackle rise to the challenge?
Just so a quick response to the last question. Obviously every context is different, but one thing that we found is that sometimes, even if adults and power holders aren't happy for young people to challenge straight on, if young people are doing things which is kind of within the boundaries of what's culturally acceptable, for example, that it's okay for young people to do a drama in the community, for example, because that's sort of, people like to see young people performing a skit or a street theatre, then that's one route that young people could use to contribute to norm change.
I think for adolescents to be involved in the change-making process, the best way to be involved is doing that themselves is the best way for changing social norms. Because like in development sector, there is one term that those boys who's affected is the best way to deal with. So if the social norms is affecting you so much, then you have to be in the front. I believe that. Thank you.
Raya, you're young and lovely. You want to share some insights? I can't claim that myself, so go for it.
I actually wanted to answer the question, like, what can young people do? Because that's interesting. When we went to the field, we actually found that these adolescents, they were using Facebook and they were using smartphones for courtship, as was also mentioned in another presentation. So they were using those. They were actually choosing partners. They were having love relationships. They were having premarital sex. We even found girls as young as 15 having multiple boyfriends by that time. And it was known to all the adolescent friends that he or she had. Now, did the parents or adults have anything to do with it? Isn't it against the social taboo? But they are doing it. And within them, there's no taboo about it. They're talking openly about it. They're sharing their experiences with us. Their concerns, the risks, what they fear, what they want in the future. They want to get married and have children, or they want to get married and work together and build a life. They're sharing all those. So within them, within their circle, they're actually actively conforming to behaviors of other adolescents, and they're actually creating their own alternate norms. So for example, if you're an adolescent within that group, not having a boyfriend would be actually going against the norm, or not having a future aspiration would be deemed as, okay, you are not really, on the same page with us. So, like my colleague mentioned, sometimes behavior change first and then there's a change in the norms, right? So I think that's where young people would be the drivers, and that's why we should promote them to slowly come on the forefront of this drive against changing social norms, because when one adolescent to the next adolescent, the behaviors start to change. They start to look at the better prospects that they have about choice and consent, of course informed through maybe sexuality education, education on SRHR, how to make informed choices, giving them education opportunities and importance of education, enforcing all these things. They are intelligent enough and they are of sound mind to make those choices for themselves. They know what they want, and they actually can drive forward. They actually want what they aspire for in their life, and they want to go and get it. All we have to do is promote that, and within themselves, those behaviors will change. They will set examples, and slowly those behaviors will have an impact on norms. Because if I'm a parent and I'm seeing that a girl who is like 20 is going to college, is getting a degree, is going to have a better prospect at earning, and she's doing fine. and I would like my daughter to achieve that too because I know that is better, then slowly things will start to change. So I think young people can set examples for themselves. They're already doing that, and all we have to do is sort of nurture them to make the right choices, to make informed choices, and also push them in the forefront to the driver movement to end child marriage. So I think.
So thank you, Raya. So thank you so much for staying with us. We appreciate the extra time you gave us to answer some of the questions. So 2 things that I've been asked to remind you of. This is a list of useful resources on social norms in child marriage that will be circulating. And also don't forget, if you can, to fill out this Lido evaluation. So thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you so much to you for giving us your time.